Hello, and welcome to Enter Christ Ministry. I'm your host and Bible teacher, Reverend Mark Williams. I want to thank you for joining me today. Today, I want to start a series. I want to jump into the book of Galatians, and we're going to walk through this chapter by chapter and do it. And I want to call the series Free at Last because this is a book of freedom, believe it or not. Historically, this book has great significance on the church movement of the middle century. It was in the 16th, well, the 15th century when a man by the actually a Catholic monk by the name of Martin Luther broke away from the Roman Church, and a lot of his writings and a lot of historical writings point to the book of Galatians is the book that really spurred him on to break away from the traditions of that time and led to a movement which gave us the Reformation movement. But not only that, it also gave us our first translation other than the ones that the Romans were using, which was the Septuagint, which was written in Latin, and they translated the Bible into German, which later was translated into King James English, which we get the King James version, 15th century, written in the 15th century. So this book has not only historical significance for the movement of the church during the middle century, but this book was in the line considered Paul's first writing. So that's a historical significance in itself because this was the beginning of Paul's letters to the churches throughout the land, and not only through the early church, but to you and I today, which he is the writer of the majority of the New Testament. He was set aside as an apostle for the Gentiles, which you and I are Gentiles because we're not Jewish or we're not Hebrew. So he is our apostle. Here in this book, just to give you an idea, think of this. You all, I haven't got a chance to go to Ellis Island, but that's one of my goals is to actually visit the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty stands for something here in America. Us growing up in here, it might not mean that much to us, but I could see the immigrants when they were coming over here in the early days, and they was coming through Ellis Island in those boats, and they saw this statue, and in her hand she had a torch that lit the way, and in her one hand she had a tablet, and on that tablet was the date of the Declaration of Independence, and at her feet were broken chains, which represent freedom. And when I look at the Bible, the book of Galatians is like the statue of liberty. It is the book of liberation for Christians. Imagine being a slave in the 1800s when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed into law. Yet the law said that the Negro slave was free. The community and the world around did not treat us with freedom. So 100 years later, in 1963, on the steps of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., Dr. King, who was named after the great church leader Martin Luther, Dr. Martin Luther King, gave one of the most riveting speeches. He talked about the architects of our Republican who wrote these words in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, that all men, no matter what color, no matter white, black, will be guaranteed the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He stood on those steps and said, but America has defaulted on his promissory note to the African Americans, to the people of color. They did not honor their obligation because the Negro had a bad check and it was marked insufficient funds. But he said he refused to believe that the Bank of Justice was bankrupt. And here it is, 2010, in a time when there are men preaching and teaching Christ plus something and putting us back into bondage. Christ freed us. We was liberated. The light of torch that lights the way because he is the light. The tablet which he have inscribed on our hearts, his word. The broken chains at our feet because he has freed us. All he done this for you and I, not on anything that we did. The book of Galatians, when we look at this book, we must understand Paul's focus here. First of all, let's get we understand that the author of this book is Apostle Paul. In the opening verse it says Paul, an apostle. So we know who wrote this book. There's no doubt that it was Apostle Paul. Matter of fact, no one's even seriously questions the authorship of this book. We look at the date of this book. This book was written, is believed to be written around the late 40s or early 50s AD. So if you think about that time frame, that was only a few years, maybe 15 years after Christ had died and rose and went back to heaven. Why is this significant? Because it's significant for the fact that we know that Paul was a contemporary of Jesus. We know that he lived during the same time that Jesus lived. The purpose of this, or the occasion for this letter, was that at this time, can you imagine? And sometimes we have to go into the context of what was actually going on at this time. Here it is, a people who have been considered God-chosen people for a long time, right? And all of a sudden, the rules changed. See, when Jesus came, he fulfilled the law. And and it was already written in the word that he will bring a new covenant. See, in the Old Testament, the Holy Spirit did not dwell believers forever. The Holy Spirit came to help them accomplish something, and then it left. Remember in the Psalms, there's a psalm that David writes and say, please don't take your spirit away from me. Because he knew he needed God's spirit. We don't have to worry about that as believers today. See, we are in a new era, a new dispensation, and it's the dispensation of grace. And Jesus, death, resurrection, he went back. Remember, he said, I'm going to go back and I'm going to send back with you another like myself to be with you always. Here it is. We have Jewish Christians who are considered the Judaizers. And of course they had all of their tradition and all of their rituals and all of their practices still within them. And here it is, this man Paul comes along and began to tell them that that doesn't matter anymore. You must understand they were very proud people, very proud of their culture and very proud of their heritage. And it's still that way with us today. So imagine us in their shoes. Matter of fact, you can see it because as the church changed in the modern age with technology and in the different and better translations of the Bible, there are some who are stuck and saying, I only use that King James because that's the only right version. And that's not even the right version because it was written in the 15th century King English and we don't speak that today. And it was actually written in Greek and Hebrew. So if you don't have a Greek and Hebrew Bible and know how to read it, I mean, the King James is not the authentic neither. So, but that's their argument. They get caught into their traditions and they don't want to give them up. And that's where they were at. Another thing, they were challenging Paul's authority because he wasn't one of the original 12. So Paul had to establish, first of all, he was establishing his authority. And he had to establish the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. What they were doing, they were taking Jesus Christ and adding on the old traditions. But Paul tells us later on in the letter he wrote to the church at Rome that when your husband pass away, you are released from that husband, and when you marry a new husband, you are now married to the new husband. And that's he was describing that we as Christians, or we as believers, we are released from the old, and now we are married to a new, who is Jesus Christ, and now we're attached to him in spirit. So we don't no longer live in the flesh, but we live in the spirit. The law was about the flesh. The spirit is about Jesus Christ. When we live in the law has no power. It's only a mirror that shows us our wrong. But the spirit gives us the power to overcome these things of this world. And when that message is distorted, which what was happening at the time when these Judaizers was adding to the gospel, Paul clearly had to write to these churches that he had established on his first missionary journey. If we read the book of Acts, we see Paul as he traveled through the regions of Antioch and Lymstrom and Derbe, and and he's establishing churches. So as we look into this letter, we see the first thing that Paul is doing is establishing who he is and his authority and who he was sent by, because many had challenged his authority. You must understand, Paul, an apostle, sent not from men nor by men. Not from men nor. So in other words, you must understand the authority of Apostle Paul, apostleship, is equal to those of the 12 disciples, the original 12, who actually walked with Jesus himself. Okay. So Paul, an apostle, not sent from men, nor by men, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father, whom raised him from the dead, and all the brothers with me. Here in this introduction, as Paul introduces himself, again, it's very important. To us, it might not seem important that he makes this bold statement. But as I said before, he was establishing his authority.